Hello, my lovelies. Welcome to the Geek Suite. I'm your host, the Kid Nerd Bean, and we're back for another episode of Angry Nerd Rant Time! And before I forget, I do want to remind everyone that we are having our September special on our Patreon page. The first 10 subscribers who sign up get a special shout out at the end of the videos, regardless of what tier you sign up on, as this benefit is usually only for higher tiers. So be sure to check out our Patreon page and take advantage of that. Alright, on today's Angry Nerd Rant, we're striking while the iron is hot, or warmish, lukewarm. Honestly, I don't know how long this has been out, but today we're talking about the Rocko's Modern Life Netflix special. Alright, on today's Angry Nerd Rant, we're striking while the iron is hot, or warmish, lukewarm. Honestly, I don't know how long this has been out, but today we're talking about the Rocko's Modern Life Netflix special. So, as a millennial and a 90s kid, of course I had to watch the new Rocko's 90s special, and I gotta say, it left me with some mixed feelings. And full disclosure, while I do enjoy Rocko's Modern Life, the show, and loved it as a kid, it wasn't one of these shows that I was constantly watching every week, getting home, racing to the TV to put it on. And I think that's partially because I was young enough at the time that I wasn't quite sure whether I was watching Rocko's Modern Life or Ren and Stimpy. So I'm not one of these people that was begging for the show to be put back on the air and is the result of the Netflix special, so I guess maybe I'm not the target audience for these super diehard fans, but as one of more of these casual show watchers who was happy to see that it came up. And I think that may inform some sort of bias on my opinion of these things, but I think it makes me a little bit more objective. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. So, the Rocko's Modern Life Netflix special, Static Cling, relies on a lot of this millennial nostalgia humor that we see with a lot of these new reboots that are coming out. In that the millennial generation, kids born in the late 80s to early to mid 90s, are having issues adjusting to the world that we live in now. And we see this in a lot of the humor that we get with Rocko and his friends coming back to their hometown after being in space for 20 years. So he and his friends get phones right away, and they start enjoying all of the new technology that the 21st century has to offer. But for some reason, Rocko is unable to adjust, and he just hyper fixates on the fact that his favorite TV show as a kid, The Fatheads, is no longer on television, and he spends the entirety of the movie trying to get it back on the air. And while I appreciate this kind of humor and poking fun at the audience who requested this reboot to be done, I don't think that they really landed the joke. So for example, in the Invader Zim remake, Enter the Florpus, we get this same type of joke where it's, self-deprecating millennial humor about begging for these remakes, where we see the embodiment of that in Dib in the beginning of the movie, where he's literally just festering in his little room, and then we see the inverse of that with the creators being embodied with Zim. So when Zim and Dib have their reunion, he asks, "Oh God, is that you, Dib? You look awful." And Dib comes back with this retort of, "You've been here this whole time in your toilet," implying that millennial culture has been spending the last 20 years in the toilet. Whereas with Rocko's Modern Life, instead of getting this, maybe 10, 15-minute, joke of these, haha, millennials can't adjust, yada, 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 we just get a 90-minute allegory of trolling millennials who begged for this. And I think what really grinds my gears about this is not the fact that this movie was a 90-minute, troll on the millennial generation. It's more the fact that it's not what I was expecting based on the trailer. If you look at the trailers for both Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling and Invader Zim, they both point out that, this is going to be one of those ha-ha moments where we get this self-aware, nostalgia-based humor, but they both also point out that it looks like the plot is going to be going somewhere. And we get that with the Invader Zim remake, but not with the Rocko's remake. And I am aware that Invader Zim and Rocko's Modern Life are two completely separate entities that are put out by different production teams and different studios, but the reason I'm comparing them to each other is because they were both put out by Netflix around the same time with the same marketing strategy and target audience. So if you're marketing these two things the same way, to the same people, you're expecting that you're going to be getting similar products. And that simply wasn't the case for these two productions. You do get a little bit of Rocko accepting change with the winds of change character showing up in the last 10 minutes of the film, But at that point, it really just makes Rocko's character development feel hollow. We don't get this who moved my cheese realization until the last 10 minutes of the film, and it really just falls flat. So, whereas the Invader Zim remake does this clever little jab with the exchange between Dib and Zim, making fun of the self-awareness of the millennial culture and that they were kind of dragged out of their, toilets to make this for us. With the Rocko's Modern Life, we don't get that same clever exchange, and then going into the deeper plot of the movie, the entire almost 90-minute plot of this movie is just Rocko being unable to adjust and complaining that his favorite TV show is off the air. And you can kind of tell from the way that they set up the plot, dealing with looking for the animator and dealing with the exchanges between Rocko and his old friend who animates the show The Fatheads, that you feel like the animators for Rocko's Modern Life weren't really as enthusiastic as, say, maybe the team who did Invader Zim did about creating this remake. And I suppose, spoiler warning for anyone who hasn't seen the Rocko's Modern Life Netflix special Static Cling, I am going to be talking about some specifics from the plot from here on out. Because these things have to do a lot with the overall tone that the show presents as opposed to other remakes that are coming out. Whereas with Zim, they have this little back and forth about, we're all garbage dumpster fire people, but we're doing it anyway and we're going to have fun with it. With Rocko's Modern Life, in dealing with the animators and bringing the show back on the air, the team feels forced in the movie that they have to go and find the original creator to do this. Otherwise, it's going to be left to these literal worms with computers. And we get a glimpse of how these 90s animators feel about modern computer-generated animation by when they show the Worm team coming up with subpar pitches for the Fatheads remake. So while I've explained that I can appreciate some self-deprecating millennial humor and knowing that yes, we are a bunch of adult grown man-baby children who are demanding all of our favorite kids shows be brought back on the air, whereas with watching things like Invader Zim, I was able to enjoy that type of humor and then watch a film that had to do with the original show, as opposed to with Rocko's Modern Life, where just the entire 90 minutes was nothing but essentially the animators complaining about having to make the movie, which kind of just feels like it wasted everyone's time. Not just ours, the audience, but the creative team as well. And it's something that comes through on screen when you can tell that the people who are making a product aren't enjoying what they're doing. And I feel that that's what really came across with the Rocko's Modern Life remake, and it really just makes me sad. Not just for me, the consumer, as someone who was really excited about watching this thing, but of knowing that the animators didn't really want to, and they felt like they were being pulled away from their lives to do this. And that feeling really becomes evident when you're looking at the story of the Fatheads creator and how they're literally pulled out of the middle of nowhere and forced into this. Much like how Rocko feels at the end of the film, rather than this being an enjoyable experience, when he watches the Fatheads remake, he feels sort of hollow. And I think that's sort of the intent of the authors or creators at this point, is that the audience is supposed to feel sort of hollow. Yes, you can be allowed to enjoy the things you did when you were a kid, but it's also important to change and move on with the times. And while that's an important message to convey to an audience, I feel like they really could have done it in a way that didn't feel like it was pulling teeth for the creative team, because that really takes away from the overall message. Additionally, I'm not sure if this was meant to be poking fun at the millennial generation again, or if it was some sort of half-assed attempt at pandering, but they do make the animator for the Fatheads in the show transgender when they discover him out in the middle of the desert. She's now a woman, and while I do appreciate the movie's attempt at an accurate representation of oftentimes the way that this sort of reveal to the family is treated, where parents can have mixed responses. For instance, when they come out to their parents, the mom is very open and accepting and is just so happy to see her child after 20 years, whereas the father can't accept it, it's too much of a change. As someone who has friends and family in the LGBT and especially trans community, seeing this exchange actively portrayed out on screen and seeing how it negatively affects not just the trans person themselves, but their entire family and the family dynamic, and watching that all come together at the end was something that I really appreciated, that even though the creative team maybe didn't necessarily want to make this movie, that they felt it was important to make this point and accurately research it, which is something that isn't necessarily done with a lot of LGBT representation in films. So I did want to pause and give some quick kudos to the creative team for that. It also, since this is basically just an allegory for the creative team being forced to make this movie at this point, I did stop and search to see if the team's original animator, Joe Murray, had recently come out as trans. As it turns out, he didn't, but because of the way that they had accurately portrayed this character's coming out and her interactions with her parents and friends and family, I went ahead and did the research to see if this animator, since this has been mostly an allegory about their experience having to come out of the woodwork and redo this franchise, if this was something that they had personally dealt with. And I was surprised to see that they hadn't. Joe Murray, as far as I know, as far as the internet's concerned, has not recently come out as trans or come out as trans at any time in the last 20 years. And with the release of all of these specials like Rocko's Modern Life and with Invader Zim and even things like Stranger Things, where it's not necessarily a remake of something that's already been done, but it's a reimagining of recent history by people within my generation and the generation prior. And looking at things like millennial nostalgia, really researching into where that comes from, a lot of it is tied to the fact that it is so prevalent with this generation as opposed to any generations that have come prior to that, is because for a lot of millennials, the kids who grew up in the late 80s, early and mid 90s, is that when they were coming into their formative years in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a massive jump in technology. We went from having things like cassette players to CDs to all of these different iterations of technological toys that came out before iPads, iPhones, and iPods, which nowadays kids and adults don't really blink twice at because there's a new iPhone every 6 days almost. But for a generation where every generation prior to that, you didn't really have these massive technological changes, and if you did, they didn't all come in rapid succession. So for a lot of 90s kids or these middle-aged millennials now, looking back to a time where all of this happened just prior to these massive changes, not just technologically, but politically and economically, and going into, adolescence with all of these additional changes going on, it has this increased effect of the positive responses that come with engaging with nostalgia. And knowing the sociological and psychological background that comes along with the increased engagement with the millennial generation and nostalgia, it makes this 90-minute allegory of self-deprecating millennial humor with regards to nostalgia all the more annoying for me personally. So I guess this hasn't really been an angry nerd rant because I'm not really angry with the Rocko's Modern Life team, but I am disappointed. Alright guys, thanks for sticking around. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, ring that notification bell, and for more content like this and to support this channel, be sure to check out our Patreon. The link is in the description down below. Alright guys, thanks so much for sticking around and I'll see you next time. Mwah!